Every morning for 14 months, Josephine Larby woke up in her daughter's spare room in Stone Mountain, Georgia, and looked at the ceiling and reminded herself of the same thing. The house exists. You built it. You are still here. She said it like a prayer because it needed to be said that way. Because there were people, quite a few people it turned out, who had been told she was not. Josephine's stepdaughter, Yvette, had told the extended family in the spring of 2022 that Josephine had died. Not in a small, private rumor, in a series of phone calls and messages to relatives, neighbors, family friends, and the pastor of the church Josephine had attended for 19 years. She had told them that Josephine had passed away from a sudden illness in April, that it had been very quick, that she was handling the estate, and that the family home, a 4-bedroom house in Stone Mountain that Josephine's late husband Bernard had built in 1997, and that Josephine had lived in and maintained for 25 years, was being transferred to Yvette as the only surviving heir. Josephine was 67 years old, in good health, living in that house, and had no idea any of this was happening. She found out in June when her pastor, a man named Reverend Akiampong, who had known her for 19 years, came to her door to pay his respects to the family. He was wearing his clerical collar. He was carrying a sympathy casserole. Josephine answered the door. He had dropped the casserole. What followed was the kind of conversation that has no precedent in polite social interaction. A man explaining to a living woman that he had been told she was dead, while standing on her front porch holding the remains of a sweet potato casserole that had hit the ground. Josephine had invited him inside. She had made tea. She had listened, over the course of 45 minutes, to the scope of what had been said about her. Yvette had told at least 40 people. 40 people had believed her. 14 of them had already sent condolence cards to Yvette's address, which was a different address from Josephine's, suggesting that the estate transfer plan was already in motion. Josephine did not call Yvette that afternoon. She called her daughter from her first marriage, a woman named Celestine who lived in Stone Mountain. And she told Celestine what Reverend Akiampong had told her. And Celestine had driven over immediately, and they had sat at the kitchen table together until it was dark. The next morning, Josephine called an attorney. Nobody in that studio knew that the woman with the warmest laugh in the building had spent 14 months being officially dead to 40 people she had known for decades. Yvette was Josephine's stepdaughter, the daughter of Bernard's first marriage, now 46 years old, who had grown up in a different household but who had been included throughout Josephine's marriage to Bernard with warmth and consistency. Josephine had not been Yvette's enemy. She had not been Yvette's competition. She had made a deliberate effort, for the 25 years of her marriage, to be the kind of stepmother who did not require anything of Yvette in return for her hospitality. She had set an extra place at the table. She had remembered birthdays. She had sat beside Yvette at Bernard's funeral and held her hand. What she had apparently not done was predict that the house would become a motive. Bernard had built the house in 1997, 3 years before he married Josephine. His will, which had been written in 2003 and not updated before his death in 2018, left the house to Josephine for the duration of her lifetime, after which it would pass to Yvette. This was the legal structure. It was clear. It did not require Josephine to be dead for Yvette to eventually inherit. But apparently, Yvette had decided, at some point in the years following Bernard's death, as Josephine's health remained good and her tenure in the house showed no signs of ending, that waiting was not the plan she preferred. The fraud case had been filed and was active when Josephine applied to Family Feud. She had applied because Celestine had applied for both of them, entered them both into the contestant lottery as a gift, a reason to go somewhere fun, an antidote to 14 months of legal documents and depositions. Celestine had not mentioned the application until the producers called. Josephine had laughed for the first time in several weeks. She came to the studio with Celestine, Celestine's husband David, Reverend Akyampong's daughter Nana, and a woman named Rose from her church who had received one of the condolence cards and had, upon receiving it, called Josephine's cell phone directly, heard a living voice say hello, and then driven to the house to see for herself. Steve Harvey got to Josephine during the intro. He asked her what she did. She said, "Retired teacher, 30 years, 8th grade science." He said that middle school was the most complicated possible assignment in education and that she deserved a medal. She laughed, a real one, the kind that arrived without effort, and he saw it and was glad for it. He asked about her family. She said, "My husband passed in 2018. My daughter Celestine is right here, and my stepdaughter recently told everyone I was dead." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey went completely still. He stared at her. "I'm sorry," he said. "What?" She told him. She told him about Reverend Akyampong and the casserole and the clerical collar and the 40 people and the condolence cards sent to a different address. She told it the way science teachers tell things, precisely, sequentially, with the specific enjoyment of a person who has found, over 14 months of horror, that the factual recounting of the facts is its own form of reclaiming them. She was not performing shock. She had processed the shock. What she was doing now was witnessing herself, clearly, for anyone who wanted to see. When she finished, the studio fell completely silent for the second time. Steve Harvey pressed his handkerchief to his face and sat down on the edge of the stage. He stayed there for a moment. "You answered the door," he said. "I answered the door," she said, "with your pastor standing there, with a casserole." "With a sweet potato casserole," she said. He dropped it. 300 people did not know whether to cry or laugh, and then they did both, at the same time, in the way audiences do when something is simultaneously devastating and absurd, and so specifically human that it bypasses every prepared emotional response and arrives somewhere more honest. Steve Harvey laughed and then stopped laughing. He stood up. "Let me tell you something," he said. And he was serious again, the way he gets serious when something underneath the surface is calling for it. "I know what it is to have people act like you don't exist. I know what it is to be invisible, not metaphorically invisible, but the kind of invisible where you walk into a room and you can feel that the people in it have already decided you're not there. I was living in my car for 3 years. I wrote a letter to my family that was a goodbye letter. I know what invisibility does to a person's sense of their own existence." He looked at Josephine. "Someone tried to make you not exist. You answered the door. You are still here. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Stop everything," he said. He was already at full conviction. Cut the game. This has never happened in the 45-year history of this show. He walked Josephine to the front of the stage. He said, "I want everyone in this room and everyone watching to understand what happened. A living woman was declared dead by someone who expected her not to be able to respond. She responded. She came to a game show. She laughed at my jokes, and she is going to tell us what she needs. She said, 'I need the truth on record. I need people to know I am here.'" Steve held up his hand. He pulled out his phone and called his foundation's legal team live on speaker. He explained the fraud case in 5 sentences. The attorney confirmed that the foundation would provide supplemental legal resources to the active case. and that a public advocacy declaration supporting Josephine's rightful claim could be issued through the Foundation's platform. He said it into the microphone so it was permanently on record. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the competing family, the Mensa family from Augusta. And before a word was said, their matriarch, a woman named Akosua, who was 71 years old and who had been listening with the absolute stillness of someone who understood every layer of what had been said, stood up and said, in a voice that reached the back of the room, "I see you, Josephine. We all see you." Both families received the $25,000 prize. Akosua and Josephine held hands across the stage. Steve Harvey looked at Josephine, at the camera, at the room, and said 5 words. "You are still here. Always." When the episode aired 8 weeks later, Reverend Ashiampong's account of arriving at the door with a casserole, described in his own words in a segment the production team added, became the moment that broke the internet in the most specific possible way. It reached 195 million views in 7 days. The hashtag She Answered the Door trended in 16 countries. Legal advocacy organizations, elder protection agencies, and estate fraud awareness platforms shared the episode. Several states cited it in discussions around strengthening fraudulent death declaration laws. 3 months after the taping, Yvette Larby was charged with fraud and criminal impersonation. The case was fully adjudicated 13 months later. Josephine retained the house for the remainder of her lifetime, exactly as Bernard's will had specified. She never moved out. 6 months after the taping, Reverend Ashiampong made a formal announcement from the pulpit that Josephine Larby was alive, present, and invited to the front of the church. She walked forward to a standing ovation from a congregation that had grieved her. She said later that it was the strangest and most important moment of the whole 2 years, being welcomed back by people who had mourned her, who had genuinely mourned her, who were so relieved she was alive that their relief felt like a gift. A year after the taping, the Still Here Foundation, established through Steve Harvey's foundation, specifically addresses elder estate fraud, fraudulent death declarations, and legal protections for older adults facing property theft by family members. In its first year, the foundation assisted more than 500 families and contributed to legislative testimony in 4 states. Its motto came from Josephine's own words. "I am still here." Today, Josephine Larby still lives in the house on Magnolia Lane that Bernard built in 1997. She still attends the same church. Reverend Ashiampong still gives her a wave from the pulpit every Sunday. He has never, she says, brought another casserole unannounced. They both find this very funny. Steve Harvey said, "Josephine Larby was declared dead while she was alive and answering her own door. She did not spiral. She did not flee. She called an attorney and came to a game show. I want everyone watching to understand what that level of groundedness costs. She knew who she was so clearly that someone else's lie about her existence could not touch the truth of it." If this incredible story moved you, subscribe and hit the like button. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that no one else gets to decide whether you exist. Have you ever had to stand up and prove your own presence? Share your story in the comments below. Ring that notification bell for more stories that restore your faith in the power of still being here.